Yeah, I was optimistic, but I got shot down pretty quickly. If I would have gotten up a couple of minutes earlier, I would have brought my own computer. But when I realized I was late, okay. Zok Tehillah Gemara. So today is the yahrzeit of the Balatanya. Is Akiva here? Today is the yahrzeit of the Balatanya. The Balatanya was from the greatest of the Talmidim of the Mizritch Maggid. And his special skill that he had was he had a tremendous ability to break down complicated things and make them easy to understand. So if you ever try to learn Tanya and you struggle with it, you should only know it could have been a lot worse. There's a famous story with this Zlochev Maggid who came to visit the Mizritch Maggid. And the Mizritch Maggid allowed his Talmidim to write down the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. So Zlochev Maggid was very against that. And one day he comes to visit the Mizritch Maggid and he sees a paper on the floor. And when he picked it up, he saw it was Ksavim, it was someone writing over the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. And he got very upset. You see, I told you shouldn't be writing it. And now what happens? It led to a bizoyin of the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. So the Mizritch Maggid was very uncomfortable. And what he did was he asked the Balatanya to walk this Zlochev Maggid back to wherever he was staying, and in the process, explained to him why it was important. Because he knew that the Balatanya was able to give over information in a way that people would understand it and accept it. And that's one of the reasons why he was tasked with writing the manual of Chassidus. Tanya is the manual of Chassidus. That's how it works. He had a murdic way of giving things over. So there's two interesting stories I want to share. One of them is the Balatanya was very, very poor. And the Mizritch Maggid would invite all of his Talmidim for the Siddurim, and he would give them everything that they needed. He provided all the supplies, but all you had to do was bring your own becher. The Balatanya was so poor, he couldn't even afford a becher. All he had was his weekday glass, the same glass that he used all year round. And you can't kasher glass, but the Mechaber Paskins, that glass is not Pelea. So you can use it, you wash it out, and even though you've used it during the year, you can use it on Pesach. And that's what the Balatanya brought to the Seder, and he's sitting on the table, and the Mizritch Maggid gets up to make Kiddush, Pesach by night, and he's looking at somebody, and he can't see who he's looking at, and he sits down. And this happened 3 times. He tried to get up to make Kiddush, and then he sat down and he aborted the Kiddush, until he said, the Ramah has a Hakpada. The Ramah is here, and he has a Hakpada. Although the Mechaber Paskins, that glass is not Belea, the Ramah holds it is, and the Ramah holds you have to kasher it. So when the Balatanya heard that this is what was going on, he was so embarrassed, he got up and he left, he never came back. That's the famous story. It's over with the Balatanya, because he was so poor. That's right. We didn't have Kimcha Pesach campaigns. So the third story is the Balatanya was Meshadach with the Berditcheva. The Berditcheva was older than the Balatanya, but they were Meshadach together, meaning their grandchildren married each other. So the son-in-law of the Berditcheva, I believe, the son-in-law's child of the Berditcheva married the grandson or the granddaughter, I don't know which was which, of the Balatanya. So by the wedding, the 2 grandfathers were dancing, but apparently the Balatanya was younger, he was in better shape. So he was dancing the whole time, and the Berditcheva 3 times in the middle of dancing, he had to sit down to rest. So while he sat down, the Berditcheva said, "Oh, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Agreis et Tzadik. Imam Echitten is Oich Agreis et Tzadik." Those are the words of the Berditcheva. Okay, so I believe we are up to Pei Beis, Amud Beis, and the Gemara discussed 2 things. The first thing the Gemara discussed yesterday was according to the Rabbanon, would Tashma Shamita be something that's Inu Nefesh or not? And the Gemara didn't seem to have a raya because the raya that the Gemara brought were from Braishas of Yosy. And then we left off discussing the Shaila that Shmuel had brought up, and that is if a woman made a nether on two kikrais, one kikar not eating it would be considered inyan nefesh, was good high quality bread, and the other kikar by not eating it there is no inyan nefesh at all, because in fact it's very poor quality bread. Can the husband, and it's one nether, you can't split it in half, because she didn't say this kikar should be aser and this kikar should be aser. She said in one statement both kikar should be aser. Thank you very much. So the shaila is, how does it work? So Shmuel said that she could be made for both. It's one hafar, and Rabbi Yochanan said she could only be made for the one that has inyan nefesh. And the Ran so eloquently explained the machlokes was as follows. The halacha is, the Torah says, Isha hafera. What is the exact lashon pasuk? Isha yefirenu. And we darshan from there that the hafara has to be a complete hafara. He can't be made for part of another. It's called the line item veto. The line item veto. You know what the line item veto is? That was one of the ways they got around the presidential veto is they put a bill, when Congress would write a bill, they would write a bill that the president B'Shumei Neufin didn't want and wouldn't ever sign, but they bundled it together with a lot of legislation that the president desperately needed. So he was forced to approve, and that's why there's something called pork barreling. Pork barreling is, let's say there's an important law that Kula Alma Moida you have to pass, and politically to kill him if you didn't pass it. But one senator wanted $1 billion for his state to build a stadium. So they would put that law, and then in that law, they would also add to it this pork barreling. So what happened is every single person who signed the law wanted his piece of flesh. So for a simple law that everybody agreed was necessary, they were forced to spend millions or waste millions of dollars on stupid projects because they were connecting it to the bill. And the president only has the option either to sign it or to veto it. And President Bush was begging for Congress to give him a line item veto, which would allow him to take out any individual clause in a bill without killing the whole bill. I don't know if he ever got it, but I know he's always talking about, give me the line item veto. So by afara, a husband does not have a line item veto. He has to be made for the entire nether in one fell swoop. He cannot be made for part of the nether. And therefore, if she makes a nether that has a part in it that's not inu nefesh, he could still be made for it. And the reasoning the Ran gave was, since the Torah wants a husband to be able to protect his wife from nedarim of inu nefesh, so whenever there's a nether of inu nefesh, the husband must have the ability to be able to be made for it, even if that means it's going to automatically knock out a nether that doesn't have inu nefesh. Any collateral damage has to come along with it, because there's a given is that the husband has to have the ability to be made for all of his wife's nidra inu nefesh. The other shita, Rabbi Yochanan shita, was that we learned from Isha Yefirenu, that the husband doesn't have a line item video, he has to be made for all nether. That's only the part of the nether that he has jurisdiction over. So if there's multiple nidra inu nefesh, he can't use a line item veto and be made for one of the multiple nidra inu nefesh that were bundled together. But part of the nether is not inu nefesh. That's not a chesaron in the Isha Yefirenu. That was the machlokes. So we were up to a raya that the Gemara wanted to bring from Nazir. Esvei. Isa Shanodra ben Nazir were on the bottom line of Daf Pei Beis Amid Beis. A woman who was makabel upon herself Naziris. And she was violating the Naziris. The halacha is Harezu Soifeges Es Ha'arboyim. She will get malchus, and it doesn't say she's like it. It says she's Soifeges Es Ha'arboyim. A shvug is a sponge. She absorbs the malchus. I'm not sure why malchus has to be absorbed, but that's what the lashon is. But hafar labayla, and we learn that hafara is mikando laba. That happens to be a machlokes that we're going to learn in the Masechas Nazir. If when the husband is made for his naziris, does it remove it retroactively, or does it only remove it moving forward? The nafkamina, of course, is if she was over it before the Afara, will she still get Malchus for it? So the halacha is Hafer Labaila, even if she doesn't know about it, the Lo Yoda Shahafer La, and she was violating her Naziris, then any Shafeka says Hafer, it's Haraboim. So clearly from this brisa we see, as an aside, that the Hafara of the husband only works Mikanu Laba. The Naziris was in full swing until he was made for it. And once he's made for it, moving forward, there's no more Naziris. But the problem is at this point, the Gemara is looking at drinking wine. As part of drinking wine, there's other Isurim of a Nazir. For instance, a Nazir may not eat the seeds of a grape, and a Nazir may not eat the skins of a grape. The brisa that we've just quoted seems not to make a distinction. The brisa seems to indicate that she was mechuyev on all of the hilchos naziris up until the afara, and after the afara, she's no longer mechuyev in any of the hilchos naziris. But if you look at naziris, in fact, it involves some things that have inu nefesh and some things that don't have inu nefesh. The amrit mefer lemisana, they mefer l'she'ein misana. If you hold the husband could only be mefer on what has inu nefesh, which is what Rabbi Yochanan holds. Well, the dilma min yayin the isla tzayra haferla, and as Mati pointed out, that it sounds from the Gemara that we're looking into the intention of the husband, but the Ran tells us that dilma min yayin the isla tzayra means for sure he was only mefer the yayin because she has tsar if she doesn't drink wine. So only the iser for her to drink wine is a neder of inui nefesh. But minchatun and minzag lo yofer lo, the lo yisla tzayra. But the husband does not have the ability to be able to be mefer the iser for her to eat seeds, the iser for her to eat the skin of the grape, because there is no tsar, there is no inui nefesh in not eating those. So that part of the naziris, according to Rabbi Yochanan, he should not be able to remove. And if that's the case, b'tisba yesar boim, the bride should speak out that moving forward, although she could drink wine, although she could be metamal amazim, but she could still not eat hartzanim and zad because those are not within the scope of what her husband could be made for. So you have a raya against Rabbi Yochanan, in fact, that once the husband's made for the whole month is gone. Rabbi Yosef, ein naziris l'chatzoyin. This is not, naziris isn't just a package, an accumulation of individual isurim. It's one package. It's one package of naziris. And the same package that includes an isur yayin includes an isur chatzanim and zag. So although Rabbi Yochanan holds, yes, you could split up your afaris, that's only if it's individual isurim, like she made a neder from two kikrais. But here, where naziris is one kabbalah, which has different symptoms to it or different requirements, you cannot split that halfway. Let's see what the Ran says. The Cuban le mishkachas naziris shlo yachol af al zag v'chartim. It's impossible for someone to be makabel naziris, prohibit themselves from drinking wine, but avoid the prohibition of zag v'chartim. So therefore, ki amar achmoni yefirenu, the mashma kule, when the Torah said the hafara is made for the entire neder, al karchin afilu al zag v'chartim come. They're connected. So there's a very interesting shiloh over here. There's a very interesting shiloh over here. Why is it, and this is the last briskerov on the Rambam, why is it that because of a naziris lachatzoyin, if he's made for part of naziris, the whole naziris goes out the window, like our Gemara just told us? What's pshat in that? Is pshat in that he's still limited. His ability is only to be made for the portion of the naziris that has inyan nefesh. But since naziris cannot survive without its full scope, so that now that you don't have proper naziris, so you broke the naziris is gone. So he broke half of it, but once half of it is broken, the naziris can no longer stay in force. Is that pshat? Or do we say that his afara actually extends to the entire nazir? So what's the nafkamini besides Kiddush Isha? What's nafkamini besides Kiddush Isha? The nafkamini is very simple. Dr. Briskerov. In our Gemara, we see that the hafara of the husband only works mikanu laba. Anything that she was over in before the hafara, she gets malchus for. But there's a shita in Nazir who holds that the hafara of the husband also works on Mafreya. So it would argue on our brisa. There's a shita that holds that if she was over her nazir, she was matama, she drank wine, and then her husband was made for it. There's a shita there, in fact, that she doesn't get malchus for the tumah. She doesn't get malchus for drinking wine because the hafara works retroactively. So if that, according to that shita, Zakti Bishkarav, you have a beautiful shaila. If we say that the hafara on the yain extends to all the other requirements of the nazir, so that's also the mafreya. So come to Chais, she wouldn't get, if he was made for her isha to drink wine, we also say that the hafara was on the isha tum as well. So if she became tamei before the hafara, she also wouldn't get malchus because it's a gloy milsa that's also mufer from day one. However, if you learn it's only because the naziris can't survive, but the hafara could only be on the part of the nether that's eating nefesh, so then yes, the isha wine was removed retroactively back to the point where she made the isha naziris. But the naziris didn't break until the husband expressed his hafara. So come to Hois, the isha tum is still there. So Mati's shaking because Mati's saying once you're saying the hafara is from back there, it broke back there, right? That's what you're saying. I hear it, but I'm just taking over the brisker of. I'm not saying I understand the constitutive guide of the brisker of. I don't want to brisk, but I want to share an interesting brisker of on how to play with this. So I want to tell you something that there's something called mikanu labol lemafreya and lemafreya lemafreya. So it gets into the real lumdus, and I'm going to explain to you how I understand it, if that's possible. Lemafreya is when he makes his hafara, the hafara, we look at the hafara as if he made the hafara way back when, and there was never any issur up until that. There was never issur from day one because the hafara happened back. But mikanu labol lemafreya is we don't look at it like the hafara happened back then. We look at it like the hafara happened back then, but only relevant to the future. So yesterday there was a full-blown neder there. Today we treat it as if there was never a neder there. So lagabi any halacha of moving forward, we look at it like there was never a neder there. What's enough kamina there? I got to go to kedushisha. I'm sorry. Lagabi moving forward is as if the neder was never made. What's enough kamina? If Lagabi moving forward now it's not there, or if the neder was never made, that would impact this shaila a little bit. So it gets a little bit detailed. Again, I'm going to leave this for the Rosh Hashivas, but at least when you hear Rosh Hashiva saying shir, oh yeah, you're saying on the sukkah, yeah, connect the sukkah, yeah. It's enough that you can identify. Your son tells you over, it's a shir from Rosh Hashiva, you come, yeah, I know the sukkah, yeah, over there, no more Nazarim, ken the sukkah. Gezok to Gemara Vayt. Like I remember sitting by Shabbos Shever Brachas of a real yeshivish, lumdish guy, a real brisker, and he got up by Shever Brachas and he's saying as a lumdish zach with keketzing, and they was looking at him like, wow, he's God. And I looked up and said, I don't know what the hell this guy's talking about. Does anybody know what he's talking about? Like the emperor was wearing no clothes. Okay. I often tell my children that shir is like Bittul Torah. So one day my son came up and said, "Today, Tati, I'm going to shir was Bittul Torah." Okay,
this is that's the joke about the bus, the Egged bus driver and the Rosh Hashiva.
Kavaldik, full circle. Okay, so Zok to Gemara Vayter. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, Ein Naziris Lachatzoin. Zok to Gemara, Amar Le Abaye. So you're telling me it's only that there's no half a Naziris, but a carbon you could have Lachatzi Naziris. Amar Le Abaye, a carbon Lachatzi Naziris Ika. So what is Abaye's diuk? The Ran explains. Amar Le Abaye, a carbon Lachatzi Naziris Ika Bitmia. The Midika Amar, since the way Rabbi Yosef expressed himself was Ein Naziris L'Chatzoyin, he could have said something more comprehensive. Like Amar Ein Chatzoyin b'Naziris. What Rabbi Yosef could have said is there's no such thing as half measures when it comes to Naziris. He didn't say that. When it comes to Naziris, there might be half measures. It's just the Yisurim of Naziris can't be halfway. So from the fact that Rabbi Yosef didn't use that comprehensive language of Ein Chatzoyin b'Naziris, Mashma de Naziris Atzmoi who the only in the actual Yisurim of Naziris, you can't have it halfway. All the Yisurim have to be Chal. Ha, yes, carbon Lachat Naziris. But there's other half. For instance, if you only kept half Naziris, maybe you would still bring a carbon for it. Kigoyin. Shanadra umanta tesvav yoim, a woman with makabel Naziris, which is normally 30 days. She only completed 15 days of those 30. V'hafar lo baila. And her husband was maper for Naziris. So after 15 days, her Naziris is gone. So according to our sugya, we learned that the hafara only works moving forward. So she had 15 days of Naziris, and it's only the next 15 days where the Naziris was mufar. They're still there. The kaim along the perik misha amar hareni nazir, the baal makers guys. The husband's hafara doesn't eliminate the Naziris l'marfreya. It just stops it moving forward. Umitama abaye heich tovi carbon al miktas minyan. Abaye is asking, how could you bring a carbon if you only counted 15 days? So he's being medayik from Rabbi Yosef's words that you would bring a carbon, a woman would bring a carbon to terminate her Naziris if her husband terminated it after 15 days. But that's not true. But according to the way Rabbi Yosef expressed it, it would be mashma that would be true. So that's what Abaye said. Ha carbon lachatz Naziris ika. Amar Abaye, he told Rabbi Yosef a better way to have expressed your answer was a Naziris l'chatzayin ve'ein carbon l'chatzayin. About it, there's no chatzi at all. Okay, gewaltig. So let's see the Ram, how the Ram explains and elaborates what Abaye said. Amar Abaye a Naziris l'chatzayin ve'ein carbon l'chatzayin keheichad ve'ein Naziris l'chatzayin. Just like we say, so you after law halfer b'ktsasa, you cannot be made for half a nether that you don't say the husband's only being made for the isser to drink wine, but v'tei aser adayin b'zog v'chartzon, but the isser to eat zog v'chartzon will remain in place. The same way you don't say that hachanami ain't carbon l'chatzayin. You don't bring a carbon on the half of the Naziris. The chol shafer labal b'soich minyan Nazirusa. If the baal in the middle of the Naziris cut her Naziris short, in this battle minyan oisayamim haboyim, and the future days post his hafara are no longer here. Shuv einem via carbon b'shvil miktas minyan Naziris shemon sekfar. She doesn't even bring a carbon to discharge the Naziris that she had already counted. Because Naziris is only discharged with a carbon if it's completed. If it's not completed, it's cut off with a hafara. There is no chiyuv to bring a carbon. Now we're going off topic, and we were middle of discussing another where Rabbi Yochanan said you could be made for half of it, only the part that's in your nefesh. Now we're going on into a tangent. We're going to get back to our original subject. But right now we're off in a tangent discussing the Naziris l'chatzayin. Meisvei, a woman who was Nadir B'Nazir, and she became Tameh. And after she became Tameh, Verfrisha Behemta, she was Mafresh and Osham. A woman or a Nazir who becomes Tameh has to bring 3 carbonates, an Osham, a Chatos, and an Oila. So she was Mafresh her Behema, which is her Osham. Because the other 2 birds, the Oila and the Chatos, would be a bird. The Achga Chafer Lo Baila, and then her husband was Mefer. So she has a Naziris that was terminated because of Tumah. She was Mafresh a carbon, but before she brought any carbonas, her husband was Mefer. Enough is enough. So the halach is, out of the 3 carbonas that she normally brings if she becomes Tameh, is she brings Mevia Chatas Oif. She only brings the Chatas Oif, the Eina Mevia Eilas Oif, but she does not bring the Eilas Oif. Freik the Gemara, the Amrit ain't carbon Lachachi Naziris. If you say that you can't bring a carbon for half a Naziris, here this is a half a Naziris. So if that's the case, Amai Mevia Chatas Oif. Why did she bring the Chatas Oif? There's no carbon Lachachi Naziris, and her Naziris has been terminated. Zok to Gemara, but you think it's any better if you hold Yesh Karbanis Lachachi Naziris? Velamai Yesh Carbon Lachachi Naziris? You still don't explain the brisa, because then Shalosh Beimish Boy Lasuye Chatas Oila Ushlam. Then you should have to bring all of the Karbanis. Chatas Oila and Shlamim are the 3 Karbanis that would be brought if the Naziris ended properly without becoming Tameh. So what the Gemara is asking is, if you hold Yesh Carbon Lachachi Naziris, Shalosh Beimish Boy Lasuye means right now when she's Tameh, she would have to bring her chatos, her asham and her oila, and then once she becomes tar, she should have to bring a second round of karbanos, chatas oila shlomen. Based on what you're saying, based on what you want to argue, that yesh carbon chatas naziris, then we should treat this like a regular naziris, and she should bring all the karbanos that a normal nazir brings, and that's not what the Brisa says. So you don't have a raya that yesh carbon chatas naziris because this Brisa is not saying that. You're right. I'm saying ain't carbon chatas naziris. So you might ask me why the chatas. So we both have a problem because this is ain't nishtaher. Some of the karbanos are being brought and some aren't. Zok to Gemara, I'll tell you why. The only carbon that the Brisa suggests bringing is the chatas oil. The ashram is not brought. The oil is not brought. The karbanos that would be brought when the naziris is completed properly, which is the chatas oil shlam, they're not brought either. Nothing's brought. Only the chatas oil is brought. The chatas oil, the masya, mishum the chatas halasam. Chatas ha'oif is a very interesting carbon. It's very cool of it. Every carbon chatas you can only bring if it's a vaday, if you're vaday mechuyev. But there's a kula by chatas ha'oif that even if there's a suffix, if you're mechuyev it, you still bring it. And the Ran gives an example. Let's put that aside. That's a very good kasha. But let's just talk about the chatas ha'oif you brought a suffix. If a woman, Rahman lost a child, and we're not sure if this was a birth that died, or if there's really no birth there at all, the suffix, if her blood was considered legally a blood, so there's a shaila if she has to bring the chatos of a yeledes. Misafik, she brings the chatos. There she's bringing the chatos of oil. So you see that you could bring a chatos misafik, so therefore you could bring it here, even though it's a terminated naziris. Frek Duvi, what does suffix have to do with a terminated naziris? Is that your kasha? Push the kasha. I believe Rabbi Yoshu asked the kasha. Somebody wanted to later ask kasha, what's the shaykhs? The bummer the kasha. What's the shaykhs? Just because there's a kula in chatas oil that you bring it misafik, so because of that you should bring it on a failed naziris? What's the connection? So I don't have a terrace to that, but it's a gavaldik kasha. Zok the hele gemara weiter. Esvei. So we've just weathered a storm. I'm already mixed up. It's too early in the morning. Okay, Zok the gemara weiter. Esvei is now getting back on topic. We had a machlokes where Rabbi Yochanan said if part of the nether is inu nefesh and part of the nether is not inu nefesh, the hafara of the baal is only on the part of the nether that is inu nefesh. So Esvei, ha'isha shenazir v'nazir, a woman that was makabel upon herself naziris, v'nitba, and she become tamei, the achekach hafar la baila, and then her husband was made for it. The Allah is mevia chatos ha'oif, ve'ein mevia oilas ha'oif. So before we were using this brisa to ask a kasha on naziris. Now we're using this brisa to ask a kasha on our nether chatzoid. If you're going to tell me that the afar of the baal only works for the part of the nether that has inu nefesh, well, frankly, Gemara, dilma miyayin the isla tzayra hafarla. Yes, from the wine there'll be a hafar because there's inu nefesh if she can't drink wine. Mitumis meis the less la tzayra la hafarla. But who said he could be made for the Easter for her to become Tomei? And here's the Chatzoyin. Mamash Gavaldik, freaked around. Why does the Gemara just answer? And here's the Chatzoyin. Zoked around two things. Zoked around two things. First thing is, where did the Gemara use the svar of Ein Nazir the Chatzoyin? To say you cannot be made for the wine and not be made for the Chatzanim and Zad. But Naziris without an Isra Tumah, that you find. Where do you find it? Nazir Shimshon. Shimshon was also to drink wine, also to cut his hair, but he was allowed to become tummy. He became tummy all the time. He was killing people left, right, etc. So you find the concept of Naziris without tumah. So that's why the Gemara is not answering that question. The other teretz the Ran says is, the Gemara could have answered it in Nazir Shlomo, but the Gemara wanted to teach us a halacha that we wouldn't have otherwise known. Zok the Gemara, we're going to teach you a halacha you didn't know. Amri tumas meis nami islat tzayra. In fact, avoiding tumas meis is also tzar. It's also inu nefesh. Tichsiv, it says v'achai yitin el libay. When someone dies, the person who's living has to think about it, has to ponder it, has to absorb it. With Tanya Hayir Rabbi Omer, my tichsiv v'achai yitin el libay. The yaspadun, someone who goes and he's masked with other people, when he dies, he'll be zoicha that someone will be masked with him. The yafkun, if he cries for others, yafkun lei. The yikvar yikvarunei. So in fact, not becoming Tomei is Inu Nefesh. Because if I don't do this for others, my Levaya, no one's going to be there. So because of that, that's also Inu Nefesh. So Eni Chanami, the Ran says the Gemara could have answered, like Modi says, but the Gemara wanted to teach us this halacha that people want to go to Levayas because then people will come to their Levayas. Even though the people whose Levayas you attended ain't coming. But there's a whole shaila actually, if the Levaya and the Hesped, is that al Tziyakra de Chaye or Vatiyakra de Shachbi? Is that respect to the family who survived, or is that respect to the mace? The Gemara comes out Lamaskana, it's all respect to the mace. A woman said, I will not give any hana, I will not take any hana. The Ran says, Mashani nehenis min abriyos, yeheya like a koinim. I will not have enough from anybody. I don't need anybody. Any yachal hafer, the husband could not be made for such a neder. And the Ran says, the afagav damer Shmuel anos planya la yafer, even though Shmuel just told us yesterday that if she even praised herself from having enough, even from one individual, that's called inu nefesh, and her husband could be made for it. Haskinin alei the Shmuel karbanon shvir lei, the mekel be inu nefesh. That was only according to the Rabbanon. But Rabbi Yosy, we proved, argues on that. And Rabbi Yosy holds that it is not inu nefesh. So our Mishnah, of course, it's the Stam Mishnah. So this pair that Rav Huna told us is going according to Rabbi Yosy, and he holds that even if she prohibits herself from having enough from everybody, it's still not called inu nefesh. She could have enough from lekat shekhupe. The Gemara is going to get into a big shiloh over here. Does this mean that she's even usher to have enough from her husband? Is her husband also lebrios? And the reason why in Yachal Hafer is because it's not in nefesh. Why? Because she has an alternative to survive. She could get lekat shekhupe. Is that pshat? Or is pshat? She could have enough. So then the Yechayla Hilahenos is an explanation of the first half of the Mishnah. Why Kodim Shani Henel Bris and Yachlaver? Because she has an alternative. The Yechayla Hilahenos Beleka Chekul. That's one pshat. The other pshat is it's two separate halachas. Kodim Shani Henel Bris and Yachlaver, but Avada, her husband's not included in Brios. Avada, her husband could support her, and that's why it's not another of Inu Nefesh. And as a separate halacha, you should know she's allowed to take Lekha Chicken Peah, even though she's benefiting from the world, because she's taking Lekha Chicken Peah. That's because Lekha Chicken Peah are hefker. You cannot decide who it goes to like Truma and Meiser. And therefore, that wouldn't be a violation of her net. The Gemara gets into that. The Ran gets into that. If you see, there's a very long Ran that goes all the way to the bottom of Peidal and Amanal. So hopefully we'll have time to cover part of that. We have 5 minutes left. I think we'll be able to do it. So what if she says that Kehanim and Leviim should not be able to have Hana from me? The halacha is Yitlu al Karchai. They could take anyways Trumas and Maisus against her. So she says no Kehanim, no Leviim are allowed to have Hana from me. She doesn't have a right to do that, and therefore the Kehanim and the Leviim could take Trumas and Maisus from her against her will. I'm sorry? I'm sorry, you're right. I apologize. That's right. Kehanim elu, Leviim elu nehanamli. What if the Balabai said, this Kohen and that Kohen may not have enough for me, so that issue will work because there's other Kohanim that he can give it to, and the person has a right to direct who his Trumas and Maish should go to, Yitlu Acher. Zok the Gemara. Alma Efsher de Mitzana Midalei. You see from here that she could have Hana from her husband. Zokt around, Kosol Kadaitach, the Seifa, the Katani Yechayla Hila Henois, the Lekha Chikhupeya, Lav Siyuma Deresha, the time of Didahi. It's not explaining the reason why it's the economic Afara, because she has a way to survive. Rather, our Gemara at this point is assuming that she could have enough from him. Her husband is not included in the Isser, and the halacha of Yechayla is a separate halacha. This is how the Gemara understands the Mishnah. Alma after the Mishnah delay, she is allowed to be supported by her husband when she said her husband wasn't included in that group of people who should be to ask. Michlal, the Baal Lav B'chal Briyasu. Vice versa, her husband's not from the Brias. And many women say, you mention it, right? What? You're not B'chal Brias, right? Ema Sefer. Let's look at the Sefer, the next line in the Mishnah. Yechoyle lehenois, what does the Bach say? V'yechoyle lehenois, she could have enough from Lekhet, Shikha, and Peah. Mashma, Avol Midabal Loyachle. It's mashma that's what she could sustain herself up, but she cannot benefit from her husband. Alma Baal B'chlal Briyasu. So now you see that the Baal is included in her Isser. So what is it? Amar Ula, I'll tell you how to understand it. La'olam Baal Lav B'chal Briyasu. Really, the Baal is Lav B'chal Briyasu. And therefore, she is allowed to have enough from him. And even though she asked herself to have enough from the whole world, of course, she didn't mean to ask herself from having enough from her husband. And that extra piece of information is not explaining why the husband can't be maver. It's an extra piece of information. Rav Amar, so that's the first part. The first part is it's a separate halacha, totally unrelated to the first halacha. The first halacha is that she could have enough from her husband, therefore he can't be maver, and she can also take from lekhat shikha upayah. Rav Amar, la'olam Baal b'chal brius. Really, the Baal is b'chal brius, and in fact, she's not allowed to have enough from her husband. Umatam kamer, and in fact, the Seifa, the Mishnah of Yechayli lehenois is explaining why it's not in the nefesh. Matam ein yochel lahaper. Why can't the husband be made? Because she has a way to survive. She can survive of lekhat shikha upayah. Her husband likes this shot better, I think. Rav Nachman Amar, it's a hybrid. La'olam Baal lav b'chal brius. Really, the Baal is lav b'chal brius, and in fact, she could have enough of him. And this is what the Brisa means to say. Nisgarsha. So this is what Duvi brought up earlier. Nisgarsha. If she divorced, then Yechoyle lehenois b'lekhat shikha upayah. Now this is a whole firestorm. So let's see what the Ran says. Nisgarsha. In other words, what the Rav Nachman seems to be saying is, while she's married to her husband, he's brios. Once she's not married to him anymore, she's not brios. So what this brings up is a whole interesting shaila. At the time of the nether, he was not included in it. Later on, he's now included. So that is the big tumult that you see around that starts from here and it goes down to the bottom of Daf Pei Daled and Aleph. That's Hagu with the shaila. Do you look? The way the Rand frames it is when she is making a nether and she's saying, I don't want to have enough from brios, does she mean whoever is brios now? Or does she mean no matter what, in the future if someone's brios? So you're bringing over, this is exactly what the Ran Tumul's about. So I'll just tell you what the Ran Tumul's about, and then we'll know the Shaila. At first glance, the Ramban seems to learn that there's a machlokes Bavli and Yerushalmi, and the case was she was noider miyarder hayam. She said, someone said, I'm not going to have enough from anybody who's a yarder hayam. And there was somebody who was a yarder hayam. But what happened? It's more than that. He said, I'm asking myself to have enough of any yarder hayam, but my nether should be chal in 30 days. Now there was a fellow who, at the time of his nether, when this fellow made the nether, this guy was a Yabasha guy. He wasn't a sailor. And within the 30 days, he became a sailor. So the question is this guy included in the nether? So the Gemara brings down the machlokes Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva says that the nether is chal based on the situation at the time I spoke out the nether. And Rabbi Shmuel holds that the nether is chal based on when the nether is actually chal. So do you look at now, or do you look at the end of the 30 days? So the Ramban wants to say that that's the same shaila as over here, which is pretty much what you're suggesting. The problem with that is that we paskin halacha l'maisa like Rabbi Kiva, and our sugya passes like Rabbi Kiva, who holds that you go basar the time of the dibur, the time that you said. But the problem is our Gemara fears always that it is relevant what's later on, because we have a back one over here. So the Ran struggles. We have a steer de kazach of Yerushalmi that says one way. We have our Gemara says another way. So therefore, the Ran wants to separate the shilas. The Ran wants to say this has nothing to do with the structure of when another schal. This is our shilah and our sugi is all about what she meant. did she mean to answer someone that's going to change later? So avada the nether schal based on what you said now. The question is, what did she mean? And therefore, the Ran separates the shaila. Here the shaila is when she said brios, did she mean even her husband when she's no longer married to him or not? So it's a shaila of her das. So even though we could possibly look at Kiva, I'm sorry.
After she divorced him, she thought he would
Right. So the shaila is that wouldn't work. It has to be based on what her das was now. Okay, we'll stop here, Be'ez Hashem, and we'll be mamshech tomorrow. So let me just see the Ran discusses, I believe, a similar case. What was the case over here? The case was the Pasha, she wouldn't be able to eat those. Right. If she said grapes, yeah, Pasha, she wouldn't be able to eat even things that are ate later. But I'm trying to get the exact case. Was so he says over here, well, the case was Hamud or Hanome Anshair. She made an issue of enough of Anshair. Imam, and then someone came and moved in. So the halacha is it's also to have enough from that person. And it's mashma, even though he came to the city after the nether. Right. So with grapes, for sure, no matter when they grow, of course, it would be also. But here the question is a person who wasn't in that massive until now. See, I guess grapes that grow later, that's all in her kavana. She doesn't say grapes that are on the ground. But when she's talking about the mastering from a city, there she wouldn't think of someone who was never part of that city and they moved. Okay,